The Able to Care podcast is sponsored by Able Training Support Limited, who build partnerships with organisations to develop confidence and competence in their team to promote positive outcomes for all. Find the link in the description. Hello and welcome to the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today we're venturing into some fascinating territory in the world of education. Joining us is Rachel Tomlinson, a true innovator in her field. So Rachel is a head teacher at Barrowford Primary School in Lancashire, UK. Barrowford has made some national headlines for its unique approach to classroom management. They're completely removed rewards and punishment from their system. So Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. We're eager to hear about this kind of bold, and dare I say, I know that's supposed to be referred to as like an experiment, I suppose, but it's kind of a way of life. It's a kind of a true passion project for yourself, I would say, more than anything, rather than an experiment. So first off, welcome. Thank you for joining me on a Saturday morning. We're doing this. So do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself and your role at Barrowford Primary School? What's the history?
Yeah, hi. So I'm the head teacher of Barrowford Primary School. Our children, if anybody listens or any of our staff will be furious if I don't tell you it's Barrowford. And you have been saying it almost right, but
right.
It's Barrowford, not Barrowford.
Okay.
Lots of people call it Barrowford and everyone goes mad. So Barrowford, I've worked at Barrowford for 17 years and I've been the head teacher there for 15. So if it is an experiment, it's quite a long one.
Yeah,
because we've been at it for about 15 years.
Yeah, fantastic. So what led you to make this decision to kind of remove the principles of the carrot and the stick kind of principle from your school?
Lots of things, really. When I started headship, I was really lucky, I think, to start my headship in a time of relative plenty for local authorities, for the system as a whole. And when I was appointed, I was lucky enough to be part of a kind of an induction program for the local authority that introduced me to all kinds of people, all kinds of professionals. And one of those was a phenomenal educational psychologist. And I was also lucky enough to be able to attend a number of things that the local authority offered freely to their schools. We are part of Lancashire. So at that point, the local authority was offering nurture training and also training in restorative approaches. And both of those things were free. So it's kind of a bit of a perfect storm in terms of what I had access to that really was transformational in my thinking. We already had, in the summer in between me being deputy head and taking up the headship, kind of had a whole skill stripping back of what school was offering. It had a very punitive approach anyway, that felt very, very uncomfortable. And I knew that wasn't the way that I wanted to go forward without all of this stuff anyway. And as a kind of very green behind the ears, naive, gung-ho, new head teacher thinking I could, change the world, I kind of stripped out all of those rewards and punishments that had felt really uncomfortable and didn't really replace them with anything. So, the staff team were very, very patient with me because they were, what we're going to do? And I was like, well, I don't know, we're going to invent something. So we'd stripped away things like traffic lights, things like house points, things like golden time. And then, we were kind of making our own way. At that point, we were rewarding. We spent a lot of money on rewards, so stickers and wristbands and letters home and all the rest of it. And we're kind of just feeling our way through that and building those really important relationships. And then conversations about attachment and child development that I'd never really had, and I guess lots of teachers don't ever have, with the educational psychologist. Nurture principles and the nurture course, and then the restorative approaches was, not to be overly dramatic, but was a little bit life-changing for me. And all of those things kind of allowed us to really shape what's now a really embedded and not experimental approach. It's really research based. It's really, and grows every year.
Yeah. Well, I know that obviously you've definitely encountered some resistance to it as far as the media, and I think obviously I did a little bit of research and stuff. I saw you were on ITV at some point. Good Morning Britain, I think, were you at some point? You're on there, and they were kind of talking about it, and I could tell there was a bit of a misunderstanding. So I'm definitely your camp. I know we've chatted before this podcast about kind of the moving away from the behaviourist thinking that's so ingrained in society. But so how did the school community and the teachers and especially probably parents react to this kind of principle, and how are they reacting now? Has that changed?
There has been a change. I think, obviously, as a new head teacher, and any new head teacher going in, changing things, has to work really hard at bringing the community with them. And I was really lucky that the staff team that were there then, and obviously it's 13, 15 years ago, there's been an evolution in that staff team, have really run with that. And what I've felt really fortunate, just talking about the staff team, for example, was that the existing staff either chose that that's where they wanted to be and they wanted to be part of this kind of innovative approach, I guess, or chose not to be, and that was fine because we're all grown-ups, aren't we? And we can all make a choice. And so what we've been able to do over the last 15 years is to grow a staff team and grow a staff team who really are congruent with the values of the school, add to the staff team with staff who are excited by and congruent with those values as well. And we were just talking yesterday, actually, we were talking about staffing for September. And we've always said, for the last 12, 13 years, that when we look at recruitment, when we look at staffing, we look at the person and we recruit the right person with the right values, because actually you can train them in content, you can train staffing skills. So we look for the values, we look for the heart, and that's what we do. So in terms of staff team, in terms of staffing, actually it's just become easier across the years because we've been really open and clear about what we want when we recruit, and so we recruit the right people for our school. In terms of the community, that was interesting. The community at the beginning, when we started to change things, we had lots of conversations and we were really open about it. We shared the research that we'd done. We didn't just kind of say, this is what we're doing and you kind of like it or lump it. It was there was a real choice about sharing all the information, talking lots to parents, lots of education really, and lots of workshops, lots of individual discussions at individual times, when children were part of what was going on. So lots and lots of conversations. Now we're in a position where most people know what we're about. Most people who choose us for that reason. So we're having less of those conversations when I show parents round or whoever I show round. I'm very open and honest about what our approach is. One of the questions that parents often will ask when they look around a new school is, understandably, what if my child's bullied, or what if something happens? So we just have those discussions right at the beginning, and then parents make a choice, and and that's their prerogative really. So yeah, and what I'm not saying is that we never have those challenging conversations anymore, because it's hypothetically, people might agree, but when you're at the hard end of it, it's a different conversation then as well, isn't it? So we do have those conversations all the time, and as we say, it's ever evolving really, our philosophy, our process.
Have you found that obviously I could definitely tell there are certain sections of the media and stuff like that. I think you've been described as, a woke head teacher. There is so ingrained in this kind of idea that discipline is all about punishment and reward. And I think that's one of the things that even the interview I watched kind of picked up on, that there seems to be this misunderstanding that it isn't then a lack of discipline. It's not a lack of boundaries. It's not just letting kids do whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it. It's not Lord of the Flies in your school kind of thing.
Absolutely not.
So why do you think it is so uncomfortable for people? Why do you think they find it that it's, because I don't think it's woke. I think it's moving forwards with understanding psychology is my take on it. So why do you think people have that connection? It's so fluffy.
I made a choice some time ago, Andy, to kind of take woke as a compliment, because the opposite of woke is sleeping. And I'm really glad I'm not, I'm really glad I'm awake. So I kind of made a choice to take that. And my nephew kind of went, well, it's great, Auntie Rach, being woke, because the opposite is, you don't want to be the opposite. So we're not sleepwalking through this. And we are, and I think woke actually means we're really aware, as you say, of all the things that go on for everybody. We're all people, we're all individuals, we all have lived experiences, we all are coming to things from different places with different lenses, with different, with the different impact in the same situation. So I think that's the first thing. So I always smile when I'm accused of being woke and say, yeah, thanks. So I'm really glad you recognise it. And I think there is a resistance, and it's quite clear, who the resistance might be from, and it almost creates this really polarised view. Discipline in schools has this really polarised view, and actually, people might accuse me of being quite extreme at one end of that polarisation. I actually see myself as quite centrist, really, bizarrely, because I think that it's, for me, it's about relationships. It's about meeting people where they're at. It's a really humanist approach. And when I say I mean our school. We're not all hippies. We're not all, we're not flag waving hippies. We're really intent on our raison d'etre is making sure that kids learn and that kids are safe to learn, because we're a school. And, our logo is learn to love to learn. It's, there's a dual narrative there about making sure that children are safe and loved and feel comfortable and can grow in terms of their own person. But there's also, a massive focus for us is learning, because that's our business. So this is about just making sure that children are in the right place to learn, in the right context for them to learn, and that we're understanding all of their nuances, and that we're seeing people as individuals and we just react to them as individuals. And for people who struggle to kind of grasp that, and when I talk to parents, I say, well, we all fall out, don't we? There's only, there's only 3 people in our house at the moment. My daughter's at uni, there's my husband and me and our son. We fall out every blinking day. And if we had a really punitive approach, we don't have a shed that we put one of us in when we've done something wrong to exclude us for 3 days from the family. We work through it. So I kind of just go, I don't really understand. So some of it, when I'm being really simplistic, I kind of go, I don't really understand what there is to understand, because actually what we just do is a parenting relationship, because in all of these relationships, there's an adult and a child, or a number of adults and a number of children. So we just parent our way through, and when I put it in that context, parents will go, yeah, it makes sense. We don't chuck our kids out or whatever.
Yeah, 100%. It's one of the things so obviously I teach a lot around behaviour and stuff like that. It's my kind of passion. And one of the things I found that kind of fundamentally across the board, when I looked at kind of the main core elements of behavioural management systems that I explored, there was a kind of a lot of it is common sense parenting you'd apply it to a younger child, but just applied to anybody. And it's a case of you don't take a rattle off a baby because it's crying. You try to understand why it's crying, figure it out, and you kind of, co-regulate and kind of, and even with teaching and things, it's not a case of, well, I need to punish them for the behavior I don't want. We then try and teach them the skills we do want. Now, the other thing I think is difficult is so a slight different perspective maybe from this, and this would be great to kind of explore. So I think reinforcers, I don't tend to think rewards, I tend to think reinforcers is something. So whether it be from a manager, whether it's from a behavioural point of view, it's people are motivated by different things. And I think, like for my staff, if I didn't pay them, they wouldn't come to work necessarily, but that's not the sole motivator. Some are motivated by money, but some are motivated by achievement, through success, through responsibility. Do you still have that element to what you do, rather than kind of doing your tangible or, your typical kind of star charts? Do you still have your encouraging motivation, or how do you motivate kids to learn?
When we try and talk about what we do, we don't punish, we don't reward. So there are no absolute punishments, there are no absolute rewards. So no star charts, no housewives, no dojos, no. I have to stop that list because I forgot what kind of things schools do really. But I know there are many ways that schools reward, but we don't do any of that. We used to talk about, and when I say that, it's always evolving for us, we used to talk about the fact that there are consequences to actions. If you fall out with somebody, you upset somebody, part of the process, part of the restorative process, and the relational approach is that we put it right, and it becomes about the relationship between the people. So, if I call you a name, it hurts your feelings, and I have a duty, a responsibility then to kind of restore that relationship and repair that relationship and try and do away with that hurt. So, we would talk about feedback, that, there's a feedback loop there. This behavior is not okay, and this is how we put it right. And we give children the voice and the opportunity to do that. And the flip side of that is true. So we don't give a sticker if somebody does something really well. We don't give them a house party or a dojo, but what we do give is feedback. And, and the most important bit is, and it's made me smile then we said about paying staff, if people in education were motivated by money, they wouldn't be in education, because let's face it, no one's going to rule the world with what you get paid in the education system. But we all get paid, and we come to work and we do a job and we get paid for it. In terms of the children, they're kind of there because they have to be. But we talk about feedback, and we talk about, they don't have to be, they have a choice. Parents have a choice about that, of course. But we give feedback. So we kind of take the heat out of all that. And we used to call it praise. And we've even come away from calling it praise now, and we just call it feedback. And my analogy is, children aren't born, we know the developmental model, children aren't born knowing how to spell any words, but, tricky words are not born knowing how to speak or walk or, do complicated maths algorithms. And they're also not born knowing how to do relationships. And I think that's because we've never been really explicit about that as teachers, because it's not previously been perceived that that's part of our role, although of course it is. Children pick that up and pick up how to have relationships because it's modeled to them by the adults. And we know that that's what happens, but they're not it's not an intrinsic knowledge that this is how a relationship works, just like multiplication isn't intrinsic. And we just kind of frame it like that. And again, that kind of takes some of the heat out of it, because people don't hurt people on purpose most of the time. There are some exceptions to that. We know that. But most people aren't, going out there. Most people want to belong, and most people want to feel like they matter to the community that they're in. So it's about just making sure that we give children the tools to do that as we give them the tools to do everything else. As you say, we wouldn't tell a baby off and say, right, you have to sit out now because you've fallen over 4 times when you practice walking. We wouldn't punish that. And we'd encourage, we'd feedback. We do all of the things that we do to give them the feedback about when it's going well, so they repeat that. And the same way in our context in a primary school, when they're learning, we wouldn't punish because they persistently spelled a word wrong. We'd look at ways to help them spell that word correctly, and we'd give feedback about when it was more right and when it was less right. In the same way, we give feedback about behaviour. And like you say, it's not Lord of the Flies at our place. There's really strong boundaries. There's really high expectations of the way that we behave, because we're all important, we're all valuable, and we need to be treated as such by everyone in our community. We all matter. So it's about feedback. So we will feedback really robustly. It's common that we will say that's inappropriate or that's unacceptable. Those are the things, but it's feedback. And we're not screaming it in anybody's faces. If you don't know that kicking somebody is unacceptable, then you need to be told that it's unacceptable. And, that's unacceptable because, and then we talk about why it's unacceptable from the person who's potentially experienced that unacceptable behaviour. So it's just about a teaching process. It's absolutely about an iterative teaching process. And as we know, children experiment. So, it is, some behaviours are more acceptable outside than they are in the classroom. So, and they don't know that intrinsically. So if they're running outside and we celebrate running outside, why wouldn't that be acceptable inside? So it's about exploring that and children understanding and learning the rules of the society that they live in.
I should imagine that there's you are very flexible as far as your expectations that are probably very, very child-centered rather than set based on chronological age. I think that's one of the fundamentals. You just mentioned something there that kind of just ticked a little box in my head a little bit of kind of, it's not intrinsic, that recognizing the different kind of social behaviors or behaviors that should be in a classroom, should be outside on the playground, that should be in a corridor, that should be in a dining room, that kids have to learn those. And I know that you do support a lot of children with special educational needs. And so, for instance, individuals on the autistic spectrum sometimes really struggle with the transitional process of environments. So although we might have this expectation that typically a child should know that you do this at home, you don't do this at a restaurant kind of principle, but somebody on the autistic spectrum, I don't get the social norms of this. Why would I change what I do depending on? So it is And again, it's that shifting expectation. So if that's a child needs to learn that and be taught more explicitly and greater support, then that doesn't mean they're bad or wrong. It just means that they need some additional support in that particular area. So is that kind of how do you have very individualized kind of child support plans? Is that a way you kind of manage it?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give the context, because something that's often kind of laid at our door is, well, obviously your community doesn't need the strict behaviour policies that other community has. So just to contextualise, we're a mainstream maintained primary school. We have a specialist provision on site. It's called a SEND unit. Different places call it different things. So our SEND unit is for children with education healthcare plans for social, emotional, and mental health difficulties. So many of those children have experienced exclusion permanently or suspensions from previous settings. They've experienced alternative provision settings. So, they're children at kind of the fairly high tariff needs in terms of behaviour. And same philosophy in the SEND unit. We don't change the philosophy for the SEND unit. We have, as a school, I think we're edging towards 14% of our population has an education healthcare plan. I think national average is about 2.3. So it's something like 4 or 5 times the national average in terms of children with SEND. We are pupil premium, so kind of the measure for children who are eligible for free school meals. We're above national average in terms of that. Our community is really diverse, has a lot of need. So absolutely, we absolutely have to have a really individual approach to each child, and that's really time heavy. But actually, if we're going to invest in anything, surely it should be our children. Surely that's where the investment should be. So yes, it's really time heavy. Yes, it's really emotionally wearing sometimes for our staff. But actually the investment is really worth it because every individual person is very, very important, isn't it? And we have a responsibility to the world. All these this fact might seem fairly grandiose, but as educators, we genuinely do have the future of the planet in our hands, don't we? And I think that we really need to be really aware of that responsibility. And I talk about, my own children. I'm fortunate enough to have 2 children of my own. And who knows who my children are going to meet? Well, I can kind of control the context, in which I bring my children up, and as children, I can hold them safe. But, my daughter's gone away to university, and I want all educators to feel like I feel, that they're really responsible for that, because some other educator has responsibility for the people my daughter meets. And I want them to have the responsibilities for the people that we believe should be there. So I think it is really, really important that investment is absolutely there in our children. And you're absolutely right. Lived experience, neurodiversity, all of those things have a real impact. And we can't just assume that what works for one person works for another person. And again, that developmental model, we kind of put, as adults, if there's a baby kind of jabbering away or screaming or upset in a restaurant, we accept it, don't we? But suddenly, at some point, it becomes unacceptable, and then we become a bit judgy about what's going on. And I think it's just that element of kindness and about understanding that people are at different places developmentally, and we're not going to hide that away anymore. And I think there was a lot of hiding that way previously, and I think we just as a community need to be kinder to everybody else and not judge, and kind of there's this beautiful word. We're actually opening a new unit, a new special educational needs unit in September, which will be for children with communication interaction education healthcare plans, and it's going to be called Sonder. And I don't know if you know the word Sonder. I don't know if we talked about it before. So it's an English word, and I was introduced to it by a young girl on a video of a resource that we use. And Sonder, to give a really rubbish explanation of it, but you can look it up. Sonder is the acknowledgement that everybody you meet is living a life that is individual to them, even though we might not be aware of it. And I think if we all had the approach of Sonder, that, let's just be really kind and understand that we might not know what's going on for this person. But actually being kind is a reasonable adjustment that we can all make for everybody.
Yeah, I have a mantra that I repeat, and everybody around me probably gets fed up of hearing it. But my general thing is, be a better detective than judge. That's my mantra in everything in life, as much as I possibly can. Somebody pulls in front of me in traffic, like, I wonder why. What's going on for them? Maybe they're having a bad day, and it's
Be
getting into that
curious, not
habit.
furious.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Be fascinated, not frustrated. It's that whole mantra, isn't it, all the time? And I think one of the things I find for that, and as you said, it's quite draining for the staff team and things like that to some degree. But I actually find that when you are dealing with the most difficult behaviours, the ones that are really starting to push your buttons, that actually really forces you to engage in your rational brain, to maintain your human self, rather than going into that kind of the innate scripted parent self and things like that. It's hard work. It takes a lot of energy and effort to do that. But yeah, that kind of or the system one, system two thinking, as well as another one, which is thinking fast and slow. So it's the immediate reaction versus the, wait, hold on, let's explore this. Let's analyze this rationally. I think there was something you mentioned there. There's that surely we should be investing in the children now. And I think obviously this is early stages. I say 15 years in for you. Obviously you're still working through the process, but a lot of the kids have probably moved into secondary school now that you started this process with. I think you're right. The foundation is the hope we're going to change the future. How have you measured the success levels of the process that you're doing?
It's interesting because obviously the children leave us when they're 11 and they go on. We have lots of anecdotal evidence. We have lots of parents who will talk to us. We have lots of parents who will come back, and say, "Oh, thank goodness." If I had a pound for every time a parent said to me, "I wish we had a high school," I could probably have built one. So, there's lots of anecdotal evidence about this stuff. And I guess because it is about relational practice, it is only ever going to be anecdotal in some senses. Obviously, there's going to, we talk about a slow burn, and sometimes we might not even see the impact of what we do. But, when people are doing GCSEs, when people are 25, when people are in the workplace, you hope there's an impact. And what we see is that, both my children came to my school. So, I can see a direct impact in them. And, we have friends who, so we can see direct impacts in how people behave and people's attitudes. What we can measure really clearly is the emotional development of the children in our school and as they arrive with us. We have lots of children, not just in the special needs units, but lots of children who come to us who are at risk of exclusion from other settings and come with really low self-esteem, really low self-worth, really low, with very high tariff behaviours. And so what we can do is we can track across the school year and the impact on that. And what we know is that those things change, and we can see changes in, we do SD strength development questionnaires. We do lots of, there are lots of measures that we can measure children's emotional health with. And what we know across school that there is an impact in terms of our children's emotional health. And obviously we see direct impacts in terms of behaviours and those pro-social behaviours in classrooms, and children being able to access learning. And we can measure, crudely through academic attainment as well, where those children have been, where they've not previously been able to access learning and now can. And we can see, so that there's a kind of a crude correlation between that often as well.
Do you think your school's do you have quite a nurturing approach, would you say, as far as the school's concerned?
Fundamentally, that's if we talk about that's what, and it's interesting because nurture is a particular intervention in the school setting. So we have an actual nurture intervention. We have a nurture room that's a recognised intervention. It's a long-term intervention for children with attachment difficulties. And when we set that nurture intervention up 14 years ago, we made the decision, because children spend some of the time in a classroom and some of the time in the nurture room. And for me, I always talk about, it's like saying I'm going on a diet, but only on a Tuesday. Actually, it has to be all of the time, or I'm going to eat healthily, or I'm going to abstain from alcohol, but, Friday and Saturday, and all, of course, all of those things that we do that. But my kind of philosophy at that time was, if children are going and experiencing this really explicit nurture program, because that's what they need, and then they come back into a mainstream classroom that behaves very differently, then actually we're compounding the problem. We're kind of going, oh, look what you could have won. Sometimes it feels like this and sometimes it feels like this. So actually our whole classrooms are based on a very nurturing, very therapeutic, before it was trendy. And that sounds really like I'm demeaning what the work that education professionals are doing, but not at all, because I think it's really valuable work. There's lots of work at the moment about therapeutic interventions and being attachment aware and neurodiverse aware and all of those things. And that's something we've been doing again since kind of the beginning, making our classrooms a really safe space for everybody. If we kind of work to that the point at which it's accessible to the children with the most high tariff needs, all it does is make it more accessible to everybody. We're not, if we're making a classroom autism friendly, actually it's friendly for everybody, so everybody wins. So absolutely there's a nurturing approach. The nurture principles that we use up in the nurture room, the nurture principles are prevalent in every single classroom, and that's where we kind of start really. And then we can provide more focused care, if you like, to those children who might need it.
I think that comes back to then. I think so. I would say that due to cultural circumstance, children are missing out on an awful lot of nurture time that they once would have had, in the fact that they are out to school and education much younger than they've ever been before. Parents are working much harder than they ever have before. Availability and nurturing availability for parents. So there is an element of, so shouldn't there be more in other places? Shouldn't they have that nurturing in the place and attachment? But I think this leads back to people's discomfort around kind of that nurturing premise, which is still kind of the old let the baby cry out kind of thing, that you need to toughen up, you need to develop that personal resilience through being independent rather than through being nurtured. And when I teach about attachment, I talk about it's quite a famous study, I believe, where they did it with rat pups, where it was mothers who licked their rat pups more often versus rat mothers that didn't. And the expectation was the rat mothers that licked the pups more often, those pups would be less confident, would be actually more mollycoddled, if you like. But actually and it completely blew the community, because actually these rat pups that were nurtured more were more confident, more exploratory, went further away from the nest because they knew they had safe places to go back to. And I think that must be, people are still in that old mentality, aren't they? Even though we've come a long way as far as understanding attachment, they're still behind in so much as, oh yeah, but you need to build resistance through. But it's just that they've just shifted their age expectation. So, but I should imagine you get an awful lot of, yeah, but that's not the real world. What
but it is the real world.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah, but it is the real world. The real world is that as human beings, we seek out loving relationships. And so it is the real world. And I think that communities are far more resilient when they're in loving relationships. And I think, you use the word resilient, and I really resist talking about resilient children, because it's about resilient communities. Because adverse experiences happen to us all. We all go through events that could be perceived as traumatic. And I think, the research tells us that the difference between lasting trauma and kind of getting past it is the community that you're part of that provides the resilience for you, that gives you the opportunity to work through that stuff and grieve or mourn or, work through the hurt. And that's the community that you're part of. And we know when that goes wrong, it's because people aren't part of a community that allows them to do that. So actually, it is the real world. And if it's not the real world for people, then actually that's the real world we need to create for people, isn't it? So it's kind of a little bit for me that we're just recreating the real world in a school, and that's unusual, because I think schools sometimes create this bizarre world that we just accept that that's what school's like, and I kind of go, why? I was talking to a family who came around school the other day who were saying that the little girl that they had was told off because she wore the wrong shoes. And it always blows my mind, because I think where else as adults do we go where they go, not sure about those shoes? There are places, on a building site, on there are things about safety, but there's things about choice and comfort. And I go to work dressed in a way that makes me feel comfortable and able to do my job. But yeah, we kind of create this really false expectation now for children. There are very few places that expect you to wear things that are uncomfortable anymore to go to work in as an adult. Very few places expect you to wear a shirt and tie, but yet we're still making children do that. And I'm always I always wonder a bit about why it's almost like they have to live through this pain. It's a bit like an I'm a Celebrity experience, isn't it? They have to kind of live through this pain, and then we come out the top and they go, oh yeah, they can cope with it. But actually, we're preparing them to cope with things that now they don't have to cope with. And they see that, and and the ones who have resilient communities around them can kind of shrug it off and go, oh yeah, it's just what we have to do. But for those children who haven't got that depth of the resilience or have other challenges, it's just another challenge, and it might be the one that breaks the back. So I think that we talk about the real world, and actually and the pushback that you talked about a little while ago, and why are we so scared? And I think it is because we do resist change, don't we? And we kind of base things on our lived experience, and our lived experience of schools has been punitive because that's historically what schools were. Although, actually, I don't think schools were as punitive as some of the schools are now. I think I think we had schools. My experience of school was that it was tailored fairly individually around me, that I was allowed to be me, and that my friends were allowed to be them. And I think we as schools have been held much more accountable for lots of things. That's when it's become more rigid, because the staff in the system are a bit more fearful and whatever. So I think we've created sort of a false world for our children, and it's almost like it's a challenge that they have to get through that. And gosh, you're a child until you're 16. It should be a really joyful time. It should be a time where all you experience is love. We know that some children are not that lucky, but schools shouldn't be adding to that challenge. Schools should be a place where we can create that resilience for all of our children.
Thank you for listening to the Able to Care podcast. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, comment, and share. We really appreciate all of you listeners. Obviously, if we go just back to the kind of the punishment reward kind of premise, because that is so ingrained in society to some degree, and I hear it an awful lot going, yeah, but when they go out into the real world, and I think for some people it's the focus on obedience rather than well-being, isn't it? As kind of like, what do you want for your children? Do you want a child to use good manners because they're scared not to use good manners, or because they know it's the right thing to do? And I think that's what you're desperately trying to teach. We just explore why this is the right thing to do, why it's more beneficial for you and for the community as a whole to act a certain way, if I've kind of got that right. But I do get a lot of resistance in when I'm teaching, yeah, but what about when they step out of that school? What about they will get bullied. There will be bosses who want them to turn up on time and follow the rules. And the other one I get, and be interesting to kind of get your opinion on, never did me any harm. So what are your thoughts on those
Well,
two?
there's a whole thing there, isn't there?
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. I talk about compliance. Do we want kids who are compliant or children who are respectful? And there's a difference, I think. And who want to be part of a community. So, it's not about compliance for us. It's about building a community where we're all respectful and loving. And I think, love appears twice in our kind of motto or our vision statement, whatever. I never know how to describe it. We're unapologetic about loving our children. We tell our children that they're loved. And I think schools have shied away from that. I think it's been a bit of we can't say that. We can't say we love our children. For goodness sake, part of the human thing is love and care. And it's not a dirty word. Actually, it's one of the most beautiful things about being a human being, that we have the capacity to love each other. And I don't know why we kind of shove that into a closet. I'm in my job because I love children, and I love being part of our community. So I think that it's not about compliance. It's about creating a community that behave in a way that's respectful, so the community works. And you behave that way because you value the other person. And it's really interesting because I talk about, it's the law for schools to have a behaviour management policy. And when I talk about behaviour management, I say it's a lie, isn't it? Because the only person who manages my behaviour is me.
Yeah.
And the only person who manages your behaviour is you.
Mm.
And I think if we tell this lie that we tell children sometimes other people manage their behaviour is really harmful, because what it does is it externalizes that behaviour, and it allows almost that, it allows children to think, well, it's not my fault because, the teacher didn't manage my behaviour.
Mm.
It's not somebody else's responsibility. So actually when people think, oh, it's a bit softly, actually it's really hardcore, this stuff, because I'm saying, no, it's not anybody else's responsibility, this. We're not allowing anybody else to take responsibility for your behaviour, because your behaviour is your behaviour and you're responsible and you're the only person that can control it. I can help and I can support and I can tell and I can give you feedback, but ultimately you're the only person who can control it. And actually that's far more helpful as for an individual to understand that I'm the only person who controls my behaviour. In a relationship, there are two people or more people, but in a behaviour management, I'm the only person. So the adults don't control behaviour. We can help manage relationships. So for a child who, for that pushback about, well, what happens afterwards? Well, actually, if we do our job well enough at our school to make our children feel massively responsible for their own behaviours, when they're getting cross in a bar when they're 19 and they're falling out with somebody, they're really aware that, there's no teacher stood behind them saying, well, don't you hit that boy. It's about, I'm going to take responsibility and I can choose now how I react to this situation because it's my responsibility and I manage my own behaviour. So that capacity to recognise that the only person who manages my behaviour is me is far more useful, I think. And ultimately that's what this is about. So, and it's hard to take responsibility for your behaviour. It's easy to blame somebody else, isn't it? Ran into the back of him because he did this, or, it's really easy to blame, and it's much harder to take responsibility and take it on the chin and say, yeah, I was wrong. Yeah. And I did that wrong, and this is how I'm going to put it right. So that's always my thing, people don't have somebody stood at the shoulder telling them it's not okay. The only person stood at the shoulder telling them it's not okay is themselves. And that's what we want to prepare our children for, ultimately.
I think that it's such a simple concept. And when you put it into, and very nicely explained, thank you very much. And I can see the restorative practice kind of ingrained in everything you do in there, which is kind of the mantra, isn't it, about that self-responsibility and stuff. I can just relate that over a little bit as you're talking there. I was kind of thinking a prime example is like speeding fines and stuff like that. Yes, okay. So I have in my time, I do a lot of miles in my job, and I've had a few points on my license over the years. And I try not to, but I never find that fear of a fine necessarily has lasted for long. I'll get the fine, I go, oh, I'll be better. And then I'll kind of catch my speed again. Not because I'm purposely being, I'm not trying to hurt anybody, but I'm just in that thoughtlessness in that moment.
Yeah.
I've done the speed awareness course a few times. And the last one I did, I don't know what it was, but something clicked in my head. There was just, because it very much put it on my responsibility and that I didn't want to hurt anybody. I didn't want to put anybody at risk. And it was looking at even just that 1 mile an hour limit can make a difference. And it was just, after that, I started to take personal responsibility, started to use my speed limiter and stuff like that. So then the whole thing of the points and the praise or whatever it is kind of just hadn't worked anyway. It was much more about, as you said, I had to manage my behavior rather than the external kind of system going, yeah, but you get fine. Okay, so it can work, but it's how long it works for, isn't it?
It is, it's really limited. And I think, that always makes me smile when we think about driving, because absolutely you're in charge. You're absolutely in charge of what you do. And there's a choice, isn't there? We can, and that's about taking responsibility. So we all naturally slow down that if there's children on the, if we're driving past the school and it's home time, we crawl past, don't we? Most people. And that's about that innate responsibility. I don't want to be harmful. I don't want to cause harm. We change our driving technique when in different conditions. I drive very differently in snow than I do when it's, when it's not snowing, all the rest of it. So it's that flexible approach, isn't it? And it's not one size fits all. And I don't. This is my driving style, and I'm driving like this, whether or not. And whether I'm on a motorway or whether I'm on a country lane or whether it's snowing or whether, or whether there's sun in my eyes, we just respond to the context that we're in, don't we? And I think we naturally, so when that thing about, well, that's not the real world, we naturally respond to the context that we're in everything else that we do. But suddenly we kind of come into a school context and we go, well, these are the rules and this is how it is. And it is just, and it feels bizarre, and it feels bizarre to kids, I think.
100%. Yeah. And that's it. I think I think a lot of people, things like, I don't, again, get into my personal views and things like that, but I'm not a big fan of karma. I don't necessarily believe in karma in so much as, because there's people out there who've done good things who are struggling every single day. And there's people out there who've done bad things who are living the high life and having what we might perceive as an amazing life. Emotionally, I don't know, but materialistically, maybe. So I don't think the whole punishment reward thing in life is quite as simplistic as sometimes we make out to children. Do good things, get good things. Do bad things, there's consequences. But no, that isn't life. That's not how things work. And so, as we've kind of already discussed, I'd rather a child kind of just innately had that. If I role model being empathic, being nurturing, being thoughtful, being conscientious, being respectful, if I'm role modeling that, the hope would be that then they'll walk away from the situation going, that seemed like a good way to behave. Maybe I should try me some of that, rather than I only did it because I had somebody behind me telling me that I should. So I think that's kind of the message you kind of send out, isn't it, in the whole teaching process. How do you, because I think there is, there's so much punishment reward in language, isn't there? As far as I did a little short the other day with don't you talk to me like that, there'll be consequences, and all those kind of, you're skating on thin ice, those kind of terms that you hear in language all the time. How have you helped your teachers and your colleagues, and maybe even yourself as well, to kind of remind yourself to move away from the instinct to punish? Because I think there is a sense of innate justice that human beings have. You've done bad, there should be a consequence for that. How do you help people to overcome
that? Gosh, lots of ways. I think we don't, language is really, really important, isn't it? And it's really interesting. So we kind of, we don't script necessarily, but we have phrases that we will use, and we will say, that's not appropriate. And actually that just creates a sense of safety, because adults are saying the same thing, so we'll say that, that's unacceptable behavior. That's not appropriate. That's, stop, I don't like that. There are all kinds of things that we use in terms of almost scripts, but not rigidly scripted. So there's a kind of common language amongst the staff team that's modeled. I mean, we explicitly talk about it. And we, when new people join, we'll kind of, give them a few tools in that toolbox. But but actually it's just really modeled by those around us. And what we also do is recognize that we're all really human, that children push our buttons, we lose our tempers because we are human. That actually, that's going to really push me right to the edge, and I'm at risk of kind of losing my rag there. And so we have this real kind of collegiate approach amongst the staff team that we can tap out. And there are certain children who are more likely to push my buttons. There are certain children I don't have a relationship with. And kind of that's not, that's all right, because that's human beings. I have people that I'm friends with and people that I would never be friends with in a million years. And that's my choice, and that's fine. And there are people who want to be my friend and people who wouldn't touch me with a barge pole, and that's fine. So I think, we give adults we don't expect adults to be infallible either, in the same way that we don't expect children to be infallible. So there's this, this huge kind of forgiveness about what goes on. And when it's if there is a situation where there's something has happened, and, obviously that happens all the time, the adults will take full responsibility for that and say, yeah, I didn't react well either. I was busy, I wasn't listening properly, or, I got crossed, and that's not all right, but can you understand why I got cross? So we'll unpick all of that and talk all of that through. And I think it's, and I think there's real value in saying, yeah, I behaved inappropriately as well, because I'm acknowledging to you that as an adult, neither am I infallible, and because human beings get stuff wrong, and getting stuff wrong is okay as long as we take responsibility and put it right. And because that's always the message. We're not expecting anybody to be perfect. We're expecting people to take responsibility for what they've done. And that's there's the difference. So, quite often when we talk about when we have a restorative conversation after something's happened, we only ever do that when it's all calmed down. It might be an hour later, it might be 2 days later, because some things take longer to get over than others. It always happens, but the distance of time is there. So we kind of give everybody the opportunity to be in a state of regulation where we can be rational, where we're thinking with our, prefrontal cortex rather than our reptilian brain or whatever, and where we can have those rational conversations and say, when you did this, it made me do that. It made my reaction this. My reaction is my responsibility, but that triggered my reaction. And so, and I think it's important for children and adults to understand that sometimes things that they do will trigger a reaction in somebody else as well. And that, because that's a natural process, and to understand that can happen is really important. But that also we can come back from it and it's finished and we move on.
100%. And I think there's so much in there that you sort of said that I think if people really thought about it, they'd recognize it as being complete common sense from a relationship point of view. That if you're having an argument with your partner, you know that in that moment of the argument, very little gets resolved. So you wait until things are calm, and then you talk about things and go, well, this is what you did to upset me, but this is why I was upset. And you can then move forwards in that relationship and improve the relationship, hopefully, as a result of that. Trying to figure out when the emotions are high, well, what is it? What did I do? And the other person's going, just leave me alone. So why do we ever try and enforce on children when they're in an emotionally dysregulated state? Explain yourself, justify what you're doing, think about what you're doing, think about the consequence of what you're doing, and stop from ever doing it again in the future. No, when I always use the analogy of a fire, that it's a case, if a fire is burning, you don't try and figure out what started the fire or what you put in place to prevent it from happening in the future. You just put the fire out. When the embers have settled, we'll pick through the cool ashes and go, let's see what we can learn from this. What caused this? What can we do differently?
And just to pick what you said, learn there. So our restorative conversations, or, when you're saying about the language, our restorative conversations all follow a learn model. So we've kind of used learn. Love appears twice, learn appears twice. It's kind of core to us. We want to learn. So we learn through the conversation. So we use learn as an acronym. We use it as a coaching conversation. And we use learn as a coaching model anyway amongst staff, just in terms of coaching and professional development. But and it's a way, again, of taking the heat out of this stuff and saying, well, this is a process of learning. We're going to unpick it. We're going to find out what went on. So either we don't replicate it and do it again, or we learn from what's gone on. So we listen. And when we listen, so I'm just going to take kind of through our process. So we listen, and we listen to everybody. And there's the old adage, isn't there, there's two sides to every story, which is nonsense, because there's at least three. There's what you said, what I said, and what actually happened in the middle. I have my perception, you have your perception, that facts are probably in the middle somewhere. So we learn, everybody has a chance, we listen respectfully. And then we explore. So we explore where we were feeling something. And I said where we were feeling something in our bodies, because lots of our children can't name emotions, but they can tell us where they felt something. So my cheeks were hot, or my fists went like this, or, so where did we feel something? And then, if we're able, we explore what that feeling might be. We explore kind of the precursors. I hadn't had any breakfast, I hadn't slept very well the night before. All of those things affect behaviours, don't they? So we explore kind of the context and the bit that ran up to the incident, if it's appropriate. And everybody has a chance to do that. So we listen, we explore, we think about alternatives. What could we have done instead? When we called you a name, what could I have done instead of that? At which point should I have walked away? Or could I have gone and told the teacher that someone was being unkind rather than joining in the argument? Could I have taken myself to somewhere quiet? So we explore, so we think about alternatives. And we reflect about who's been affected by it, because quite often, there's never just two people affected by an incident, is there? There's a whole the pond rippling out. So we reflect about who has been affected and how those people have been affected. Quite often say, well, you have been affected now because you're having to have this conversation with us. And, so there's all kind of that ripple effect. And then the most important bit, really, the second most important, well, kind of equally important as the listening bit, is the next steps. So next steps, what we're going to do now, where we're going to go, how do we repair the harm that we've caused? What do we need to do? What do we need to learn from it? So that's kind of our process. So we listen, we explore, we think about alternatives, we reflect, and then our next steps is the process.
Yeah, it's good. It's very. I have a perform debrief, which follows a very similar pattern of, again, it's that restorative, it's reflection, it's kind of like and I think I can tell from what you've spoken about. This isn't just a behavioural management principle; it is an entire culture. It is an attitude that everybody, children, adults, and parents, are encouraged, I should imagine as well, to engage in this kind of this process. And so it's foundationally there. So you've reduced the blame culture, not just towards children, but also towards a staff team as well. So I should imagine that it's had a positive impact as far as the well-being of the teachers as well, to some degree. I kind of get the feeling that would be the case, because maybe there is less, well, they didn't do this and they didn't do this and they're not pulling their weight, because it goes, if I'm following that curiosity through, then it's a case of, if I'm being curious about children, I should be curious about my colleague. Why aren't they pulling their weight? What's going on for them? Do they need support? Do they need help? Why is this child pushing their button? Do you have or implement any specific kind of like self-care programs, well-being programs for the teachers or anything like that as part of the process? Or
yeah, I mean, we have all kinds. Again, it's just really individual. So we have all kinds of things in place, and we just create programs. Or if people need stuff, we work out how to give it to them. So we don't have compulsory yoga, for example, but
I love that.
Can't think of anything worse. So but
that
it
sounds like a punishment.
Yeah. So it's absolutely. So it's about how do we work? I mean, there are things that we do, like that I think sometimes our staff forget that are available. So we have implicitly, if your child is in a performance or your child, you're there. It's unconditional. That your children only are in a reception Christmas play once, and I'm not going to be the reason that you miss that. So there's that kind of whole thing about recognizing that you are a person, Sonder again, that you have stuff going on that you want to be, a part of, and if you can be a part of that, then actually it helps you be better at school for our kids at school too. And also there's a modelling thing there about life is important, relationships are important. I have a responsibility to my family, and that's important as well. So absolutely, there are all kinds of things. We just have a really comfortable staff room for a start. That a place of sanctuary and a place of quiet and calm, and that's not a workspace. And we can go, and there are places that we can get away to. Just the stuff that I was talking about before about if a situation is tricky, we can walk away. You can have just take some time, have a brew, go for a walk, do all of that stuff. So and it's just about the stuff that we have to do because we are at work, and there's a lot of accountability in the teacher's job, but how do we systematize that so it's as little of a burden, that staff. There's that thing that work's only onerous if you can't see the purpose to it. So it's about our staff seeing the purpose to everything that we ask them to do, and then actually you're happy to do it. Are you? If you see a purpose to it and you see that it makes you better at your job or the outcome's better, then you're happy to do it. It's only when you have to do stuff that feels nonsensical that you get frustrated.
Obviously, there is a bit of a culture of negativity around the educational system. I think there's a lot of teachers out there who are incredibly frustrated and overwhelmed and feeling and leaving the profession as well. I put a post out recently and a lot of teachers leaving. Do you think this approach can be applied to all schools across the spectrum? Do you think it is completely reliant on, do you think funding massively impacts on it? Or do you think it is just a cultural change to just, your opinion on that?
Yeah, it makes me really sad when to reflect on how some of my colleagues feel about the profession. It's the best job in the whole world. We do actually hold the world in our hands as a teacher, and we have such a powerful impact, for years and years and years and years and years. When you think about how many children a teacher touches, in a really positive sense, and influences, and all that things, and there's that whole thing. All of us can think of a teacher who had a massive impact on us, positively or negatively. And that's the power that we have as teachers, and that's an incredible privilege. It's an incredible honor. And one of the things that, again, I talk to parents about is that when I'm showing them around is that whoever the child is, we recognize that, we talk about percentages and this, that, and the other, but every single child is every single parent's 100%. And we never, ever forget that. It's, if I said to someone, oh, just give me your car keys and I'll just borrow your car, for 195 days, they think I was having a laugh. But yeah, but parents are expected to give their most precious possession over to people they don't know, really, often. And what a responsibility that is, but what a privilege and what an honor that is. And that's something that we kind of never take lightly. And it's something that we talk about, we remind each other of all of the time, that this is a privilege and it's an honor and it's a huge responsibility. And what a joy it is to be able to do that. And that's what teachers should be. And it makes me really sad when that's lost, because that's why most teachers come in, because that's what most teachers feel. And it makes me really sad that sometimes that can be lost amidst all of the other stuff. So, leadership, education, leadership should be about protecting that sense of honor and privilege and responsibility from all of the other nonsense. That should be the job of the school leader. And again, creating that context in which teachers can really use that power really, really positively, and really thoughtfully, and with the huge delicacy that it needs. So we're not going to be those teachers who, do you remember them? Right. But oh my God, I had this teacher when I was in year 2 and they were incredible and I wanted to be a better person because of them. So that's what we want. And of course I'm going to say that I think this philosophy enables that. We've seen that it does in our school. I'm never, ever, ever going to say it's easy, but stuff that's worth doing very rarely is easy. And one of the things I always say to children is, if you ever come to a crossroads and you've got a choice, usually the one that's the really hard choice is the right one. So if that's a hard choice to make, that's probably the right choice, because actually stuff that's worth doing is usually really hard. But actually, the energy that we get from doing something really hard, really well, and seeing a really positive impact, kind of allows us then to carry on doing that, doesn't it? The energy is regenerative, isn't it? So I think we just need to create a context in which teachers have the regenerative energy to do a really hard job really, really well, because it's really important. I don't know if that answered your question, but I really feel strongly about that.
Yeah, no, that was an amazing answer. And I think my last kind of question would be, do you think, because primary school, I see a lot more movement to your kind of philosophy to some degree or another in a lot of primary schools, not all. Secondary schools, different matter. I think, I don't know what's going on there in the same way. Do you think this can translate over to the secondary environment as well? Or do you think it's just, there's too much expectations from above as far as, because I mean, for me, like even homework, I have an issue with homework. I don't like homework. I don't agree with homework, because we get very little time with parents anyway. But instead of actually giving that time and allowing parents and children to spend time with each other in a fun and engaging in a childhood way, a parent is doing a child's homework, because sometimes it's too hard for the child, from what I've seen. So parents are doing children's homework when they finish work. I don't see how that's improving a relationship. But maybe that's a rant for another time. I'm going to... I mean, it looks like you agree with me.
Yeah, I'm nodding.
You agree with me wholeheartedly on that. But yeah, so yeah, secondary school. Do you think that can work? Do you think it's harder from what you've seen?
I think 100% it can work. I think that there are some things that make it more difficult and some things that make it easier. I think the fact that teachers see a number of children every day is potentially harder. But, I kind of don't just have 30 relationships in my life. As people, we manage hundreds of relationships, don't we? So actually we can manage, we have the capacity to manage more relationships. I'm not saying that it doesn't make it harder, but, the effort is worth the outcome, isn't it? But I think, the payoff of that is that you're not dealing with a 4-year-old for whom right at the beginning of this journey, you're dealing with with children who've had, who've had 10 or 11 years of experience of relationships, they're more rational, they have more language, they have more capacity to do all of that with all the hormones that come along with being a teenager as well. And so actually, I think, yes, it is possible. And two, it's massively important because, we know those teenage years are really, really important in terms of child development and what happens for children and teenagers in terms of the societal resilience around them. We know that they don't make very rational decisions sometimes. We know that they, I'm living with a 16-year-old. Believe me, I know it's really difficult to be around teenagers. We know all of that stuff. But what I do know is that my 16-year-old is really different at school than he is at home because because that's the way that life is, isn't it? But I think that it actually, not only can it be done, I think it's really, really important because we need to keep kids in school. We need to keep kids as part of the community, not feel like they're on the periphery or have been, even worse, have been pushed out of the community, because we're creating a massive issue for ourselves if kids feel isolated, if kids feel rejected. And the older children get, the harder it is to resolve that, I think, for them. And we need that sense of mattering and belonging, and especially in the hormone soup that teenagers are. We absolutely need to keep them, and we need to hold them as part of our community and make them think that they matter, because otherwise awful things happen, don't they? So yes, it might be harder in some respects, but actually it becomes ever more important, I think.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. You've when I found out about you and obviously watched a podcast about you to start off with, I was fascinated because it's kind of a lot of the stuff that I teach that I kind of try and get across. But it's I've come across it in obviously residential children's homes and in foster care and stuff like that. And I know schools are trying to move in that direction, but there seems to be this barrier there significantly. So to hear of a school that's kind of really actioning it and taking it maybe to the extremes. Some people would perceive it, but I think just where it should be is the right, is really fascinating. I think obviously whether it be an experiment, a project, or whatever it is, I think I can see the outcomes if more people applied it, improving mental health for children and adults when they then step into that world, and changing some of the behaviors and the way we treat each other out in society as well. I think some of the old behaviorist models have been quite damaging, even though they've dominated psychology and dominated society for a number of years in the restorative justice practices and everything like that. So yeah, I definitely wish you the very best of luck on your journey, and I'll be keeping in contact to make sure I engage and see how it goes and learn more from your experiences 100%. So, but thank you so very, very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.